My name is Darren Thomas and I am the Director of Educational Research Techniques. In this video, we're going to get some ideas on how we can give feedback on written work to our students. So let's take a look at this. Basically, in this short presentation, we're going to look at 4 components of providing feedback, particularly feedback for written assignments to students. We're going to look at the purpose of your feedback, who, how, and the what of the feedback. Those are the things we're going to look at. These are like the 4 components, if you will. Now, the first thing you have to think about is, what is your purpose? In other words, as you are thinking about how you're going to give feedback to your students, how do you want them to improve? Teachers are often vague about this. They'll say, oh, I want my students to improve their writing. Okay, that's very beautiful. But specifically, what do you want them to do? Do you want them to develop better structure of their paragraphs? Do you want them to have a better mastery of organizing the different sections of the paper? Do you want them to improve their grammar? Are you concerned about their spelling? In other words, the key component to the purpose is to be specific. Now, generally, you cannot cover everything in every assignment. So if you really want your students to improve, you have to look at different aspects of writing across several assignments throughout a semester. Maybe in the first paper you focus on grammar, the second paper you focus more on the structure of the paragraphs, make sure that there are main ideas and supporting details. Maybe in a later section you focus more on the thesis statement, whatever. But by looking at the broader picture, you can divide up how you want them to improve by gearing it towards specific assignments throughout the learning experience of the semester. Now, as you are trying to figure out your purpose, when you start to get an idea of what you want students to do specifically in a specific assignment, of course, you need to develop a rubric. The rubric will benefit several people. First of all, the rubric will benefit you, the teacher, because you will be consistent in how you mark and assess the students. The rubric also benefits the student because they have an idea of the expectations that you have for them. And lastly, if you use peer evaluation, the rubric will benefit peer evaluation because there's some sort of a concrete set of expectations that the peer evaluator can use to benefit the student. So once you capture what your purpose is, then you can implement that into several assignments across the semester and also into specific assignments with the rubric. Now, the next thing you have to ask yourself, and we've already kind of talked about this a little bit, is who gives the feedback? Of course, there are probably 3 sources. You as a teacher can give feedback. This is the traditional approach. But also the peer and also self-evaluation can be used to provide feedback for writing. So with the peer evaluation with the teacher and also with the self, I recommend the use of a rubric in which that can guide their thought process and how to assess the quality of the actual writing assignment. Now, if you do peer, you want to give examples and demonstrations of that, of course. And also with self-evaluation, this is where you allow the student to try to give you a sense of what they think of their performance. Again, this develops what we call autonomy in their learning. Peer review, peer evaluation also does this as well. So you have to think of not only your purpose, what it is you want to provide feedback for, but also you must think about who is giving the feedback. Now, if you as the teacher are giving the feedback, one of the challenges that you have is that, of course, you know that assessing writing is very subjective and very time consuming. And so there are 2 strategies that you can use to expedite the experience of grading mini papers. The first one is called selective marking. Selective marking is where you identify a specific criteria that you want to look at and you only focus on that one criteria for the paper. So for example, again, going back to my favorite thing about discourse, the structure of the main ideas and the supporting details and how the paragraphs work together in sections inside the paper. Perhaps that's what you want to focus on, the flow of the narrative as the student writes. In other words, if you focus on the discourse, if you focus on these broader picture issues, you are not even thinking about spelling or grammar. You are only focusing on the broader picture of improving the flow of the paragraph in terms of how the ideas work together to present and to support the thesis statement or the purpose statement. That is how that works. So it's called selective marking. Now, for many traditional teachers, this is unbelievable. When you read a paper, you catch everything. And there's nothing wrong with that except the time pressure. 35 essays, not always practical. The second one that I want to expose you to is the idea of sample marking. That is, instead of grading all 30 essays, all 35 essays, perhaps you look at 10 or 12 of them. Because what happens is, again, this is from experience, is that students often make the same mistakes. And so by getting that sample of 10 students instead of 35, you can share with the whole class commonly seen errors. And this helps everybody to go to the next level. It's not as good as providing personalized feedback, but it gives them something. Now, sample marking is probably only going to be wise to use on rough drafts. I mean, you wouldn't want to submit final grades based off of reading 10 out of 35 papers. That's not quite acceptable for many institutions. However, to provide quick feedback and not necessarily a letter grade, sample marking will provide students with some sense of how they can improve. Because as you're talking about what John and Jane did wrong, Jimmy's going to be like, yeah, I did the same thing wrong too. And he will be able to correct that even though you never actually touched his paper. Again, for the more traditionally minded teacher, this is something very difficult to swallow. But again, when time pressure is on and you want to try to help students, sometimes this can work. Now, another thing is that after you figure out who's going to say it, how to say it, whatever, you have to figure out, okay, what do I say when I actually either write comments down or I meet with the students for the feedback. And basically there are three components to it. You have to tell the student what went well. You have to provide what we like to call positive feedback, as you can see. You also, of course, have to tell them what went wrong or what needs to improve, and this is constructive feedback. Now, with these first two bullets here, you have to make sure that you provide examples. Don't just say, wow, I really like how nice your paper is. What do you mean by nice? Do you have examples of what nice looks like in my paper? And the same thing like, oh, your paper is very unclear. Okay, fair enough. But what exactly is unclear about my paper? Students need specific examples and not vague, superficial comments. Because then they're trying to fix something they cannot see. Because keep in mind, if they could see it, they would have fixed it before they gave it to you. At least the students who are trying to perform well. And so, as you go through the first two bullets, the positive and the negative, you must provide actual examples like see line 15, see page 2, paragraph 3, whatever. Something like that so that they have an idea of where the wrong is and where the right is. And lastly, you want to, if possible, provide suggestions. So if a student is struggling with their passive voice and then you want them to use active voice, perhaps you want to give some examples of this. Again, you don't necessarily have to do these things one-on-one. These are things you can teach to the whole class, either if you use sample marking or if you read all the essays. You can say, hey, several people struggle with this. Let me show you how to do this. Or let me give you some examples and use living, breathing examples anonymously from the class. So, in this particular video, we've been looking at how to provide written feedback to students. We've been looking at the purpose. Why are you trying to get them feedback? Who is going to get the feedback? How can the feedback be given and what to say when you do it? So I hope that this video gives you a deeper insight into understanding how this process works. So my name is Darren Thomas. I am the Director of Educational Research Techniques. Thank you for listening.